Buah mangga enak rasanya, si mana lagi yang Tuhan paling terkenal. Siapa saja Tuhan rajin bekerja, pasti menjadi warga berguna. Halo.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The English Department of the University of Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka is highly committed in becoming a leading English department in producing Islamic graduates with spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and social intelligences. Our curriculum is designed to support the enhancements of students' competencies and readiness to work in various professions such as English teachers, educational researchers, and entrepreneurs. Our graduates are also prepared to be qualified to take part in other professions such as writers or editors of language education books, translator, tour guide, and journalist. We have built international partnerships or collaborations in running various programs such as students mobility and international internship for our students. They are intended to build global competitiveness of our students. More importantly, we've got professional lecturers who are ready to provide the best academic services for our students. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. How is everyone doing? Well, I really do hope that we are all doing great and still staying safe and strong. And because, as we all know, we are in the middle of the pandemic situation today, so let's be a little bit more cautious. Um, while waiting for other participants to join, we have prepared a little something, a singing performance from one of the students of the English department. Please welcome the ever so talented Rizkina Ayu Indriani. There appear to be some technical difficulties for the moment. So for all of the participants, please, we advise to wait patiently as the committee is trying to figure out the problem. Thank you very much. All right. So as we all know, this is an international seminar. We have a lot of participants today from all over the world. So my partner Melanie is has prepared something for all of the participants.
Okay, yes, Farah. We had a lot of foreign student participants, and we have 7 countries are participating in today's event. Okay, all right. First, we call our friend from Thailand. Thailand, Sawadee Uh, and next, Vietnam. Xin chào, Vietnam. Next, Philippines. Kamusta, Philippines. And not only from Southeast Asian, we also have a participant from Western Asian. So let's call our friend from Kazakhstan. Salam Kazakhstan. Next is Uzbekistan. Salam Uzbekistan. And this is the country that nearest from Egypt. So, which is this country will speak with Arabic language as daily language. So, if it is it okay for me to greet you by Arabic language? If yes, كيف إذا أنا أتكلم باللغة العربية؟ طيب, كيف حالكم Libya? And the last country and one and only, of course, and obviously our local student, Indonesia. Apa kabar Indonesia?
Hello, Indonesia. And
Okay.
hello from Libya. There are a lot of participants here today, and we really, we really are so thankful for the participation of everyone. And I hope that the program today will lead to a positive outcome in the future. Thank you. The seminar will begin shortly, so please wait. As we are about to begin, please be seated. There are a few housekeeping notes to make before we begin today's program. Please ensure your name matches the name used during registration, accompanied by the name of the country you are from. Participants are requested not to activate the microphone feature during the webinar. Participants write down their attendance on Google Form. The link will be provided via the Zoom chat box. You can access the materials later on our website at english.uhamka.ac.id. We will send the certificate no later than 7 days after the webinar via email. Thank you for your cooperation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. An excellent afternoon to Director of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka University, Professor Dr. Gunawan Suryaputro, Master of Humanities. The Dean of the Faculty of Teaching and Teacher Training of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka University, Dr. Desvian Bandasyah, Master of Education, the Head of the Study Program of English Education of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka University, Mr. Silih Warni, Ph.D. Our honorable speaker, Dr. Sabine Little, Ph.D., and all the respectable participants of today's seminar. I'm Farah Andina, your master of the ceremony this evening, and on behalf of the committee, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to our very first international seminar on developing digitalized instructional materials, principles, and guidelines. Now, without further ado, let's proceed to the first agenda, the recitation of the Holy Quran by Mr. Irfan Maulana, Bachelor of Library Science, accompanied by Melanie Fabriani.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا يفسح لكم إذا قيل انشزوا فانشزوا يرفع الله يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات والله بما تعملون خبير صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Believers, when you are told, make room for one another in your assemblies, then make room. Allah will bestow amplitude on you, and when it is said, rise up, then rise up. Allah will raise to high ranks those of you who believe and are endowed with knowledge. Allah is well aware of all that you do. Al-Mujadilah, verse 11.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right. We will begin the seminar shortly, but before we begin, because there are a lot of new participants coming in, let me restate the rules of this webinar again. The first one is you have to make sure, please ensure that your name matches the name used during the registration, accompanied by the name of the country you are from. The format as your name underscore the country you are from. Also, the participants are requested not to activate the microphone feature during the webinar. Participants will write down their attendance on Google Form. The link will be provided via the Zoom box. You can access the material later on our website at english.uhamka.ac.id, and we will send the certificate no later than D+7 of the webinar via email. Thank you for your cooperation. And one more thing to point out, later on the Q&A session, we have provided a Slido. So the question that you are going to ask are not going to be written on the Zoom chat box, but on the Slido. The link will be provided shortly. Thank you. The link to the Slido are on the Zoom chat box below. So make sure to write your questions there later on. The question with the most like are going to be asked to the keynote speaker. This is to avoid duplicate questions or questions that are irrelevant. Thank you. Now, the following agenda is listening to the national anthem of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya, and Mars Muhammadiyah. All of the participants, please listen attentively.
Indonesia tanah airku, tanah tumpah darahku. Di sanalah aku berdiri, jadi pandu hidupku. Indonesia
Now, allow us to invite the head of the study program of English Education of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka University, Mr. Silih Warni, Ph.D., to deliver his opening speech. Mr. Warni, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Farah. Can you hear my voice clearly? All right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrofil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa min tabi'in ihsan illa yaumidin amma ba'd. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all in this webinar, in this program as part of the short course that is organized by English Department of the University of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka. In this virtual meeting, allow me to greet Honorable Director of the University of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka, Professor Gunawan Surya Putro, and the Vice Rector of Students Affairs, Dr. Lely Kodaria, the Dean and the Deputy Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Desvian Bandarsha and Dr. Sri Astuti. We've got also Dr. Samsul Ma'arif here. Thanks for joining this program. And then my colleagues in English departments and in Faculty of Teachers Training and Education. And for sure, all the participants of this visiting lecturer and short course program. For your information, we've got around 400 participants registered for this program, yeah. And the participants, as Farah and Melanie mentioned, come from different countries. We've got participants from Indonesia, of course, and then we've got others from Thailand, from the Philippines, and from Vietnam. Yeah, we've got also some from Egypt, and then Uzbekistan, yeah, Kazakhstan. We've got also some from Libya. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it a lot for your participation in this program. And I would like to thank your participation in this program, and for the organizing committee. Thank you very much for your hard work to make it happen today, and for our guest lecturer, our respected guest lecturer, Dr. Sabine Leo from the United Kingdom, from the University of Sheffield. Thanks for making it today to give or to share perspectives on the digitalized instructional materials for EFL teaching. I would like to thank to also the head of International Relations Office. We've got Dr. Purnama Saifur Rahman here. Thank you very much for keep supporting the program in English education, and for Pak Dekan, for the Dean of FKIP or Faculty of Teacher Training and Education. Thanks for keep supporting our program. Yeah. Today's event is part of the short course program that we organized, that is hopefully becoming a part of our contribution to the better English education, not only in Indonesia, but to wider context as well, particularly in enriching or widening horizons on how to design instructional materials, how to design English as a foreign language instructional materials, and integrate technology, integrate the digital platform in the instructional design. We really hope that all the participants who come from different countries could engage well in all the activities, and it could also be a good beginning for networking. So get along with each other, and we are really open to future collaborations. For contributive partnership and collaboration, we are very welcome, inshallah. And I think that's all from me. Have a fruitful program and enjoy it. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Mr. Warni, for the speech and the report of today's seminar. We will proceed with the opening speech from the Dean of the Faculty of Teaching and Teacher Training of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka University, Dr. Desvian Bandarsyah, Master of Education.
Thank you, Farah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'in ala umuri dunya waddin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh la nabiyya ba'dah. Allahumma sholli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Amma ba'du. Honorable Rector of the University of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka, Professor Gunawan Suryaputro, MHUM, and the Vice Rector, the guest lecturer, Sabine Little Ph.D., Dr. Purnama Saifur Rahman from Office International Relations UHAMKA, all invited guests, and all participants of the English Department short course program. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Faculty of the Teachers Training and Education, I am pleased to welcome to you all to the first session of the short course program organized by the English Education Department, Faculty of Teachers, Training and Education of University of Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka. Our faculty has been very concerned with all programs that can contribute to the better education not only in Indonesian, but also in international context. For that, we have run various international programs and build partnership and collaboration with a number of universities in different countries. English education is one of the study programs in our faculty, which has high commitment to give contribution to the better English education. Technology has been a crucial aspect, which has been integrated in the teaching and learning activities. This event is intended to share perspective and practice on developing digital instructional materials for teaching English. I hope it can be beneficial for all the participants. Finally, enjoy the program and get as many lessons as possible. Thank you for all. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Mr. Barndasha, for the opening speech. Please hold on one moment. We are very sorry to inform you that our rector for today cannot join us for today, as he is hold on in some other place. And untuk acara selanjutnya kami turut mengundang Ibu Wakil Rektor 3 Universitas Muhammadiyah Profesor Dr. Hamka, Ibu Dr. Leli Kodariah, untuk memberikan pidatonya sekaligus untuk membuka acara webinar hari ini. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Mas Iliwarni. Mohon ditranslate ya, dibantu.
Don't worry about that, it's fine.
Baik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin, arrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Saya menyampaikan ucapan terima kasih. Selamat datang di Universitas Muhammadiyah Profesor Dr. Hamka dalam rangka kegiatan pembukaan untuk kerjasama antara program studi pendidikan bahasa Inggris melaksanakan kegiatan yang diprakarsai oleh unit kerjasama. Bapak Ibu, pimpinan fakultas dan juga narasumber, pertama tentu saya ingin menyampaikan permohonan maaf bahwa Pak Rektor tidak bisa hadir di tengah-tengah kita, nampaknya kondisinya sedang kurang sehat. Silakan Mas ini.
All right. Thank you. Allow me to translate what Dr. Laili Kodaria has mentioned. First, Ibu Laili asked or apologize that our rector, Professor Dr. Gunawan Surya Putra, couldn't attend this as he is now not feeling well. He got flu. We pray that hopefully he is all right. But on behalf of the university, Dr. Laili Kodaria welcome you all, and she is very pleased to have all the participants joining in this program.
Kegiatan yang dilakukan oleh program studi pendidikan bahasa Inggris merupakan 4 kegiatan yang dilakukan atas prakarsa dari unit kerjasama. 2 dilakukan oleh Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan, kemudian 1 yang dilakukan oleh program studi pendidikan bahasa Arab, dan 1 lagi dilakukan oleh pendidikan oleh Fakultas Ekonomi Islam. Kegiatan ini ingin mendorong program studi untuk bisa berinteraksi secara internasional di dalam rangka mengembangkan seluruh potensi-potensi yang dimiliki program studi. Tentu ini kami fasilitasi supaya apa yang dilakukan oleh program studi di dalam kegiatan-kegiatan secara internasional ini tentu dalam rangka membuka wawasan, membuka kesempatan, membuka potensi-potensi untuk saling mengembangkan, bekerja sama dengan masyarakat luas. Tentu ini untuk mendorong kemajuan-kemajuan dari program studi.
The university has got a very strong commitment to hold any programs that can build what is collaborations or international collaborations under the coordination of international office. Yeah, we've got Pak Purnama Saifur Rahman, and this program is one of 4 programs that has been run in the university. In other faculty, we've got the program in Arabic education, and then in economics, dealing with Islamic finance, and then we've got also a program by the history educations, introducing Jakarta culture to international scope. And the university has been supporting all the programs intended to build that kind of international events of partnerships with other institutions as well.
Kami ingin juga mengabarkan bahwa Universitas Muhammadiyah Profesor Dr. Hamka itu memiliki 9 fakultas, kemudian 1 fakultas program pasca sarjana. Berada di ibu kota negara Republik Indonesia, tentu hal ini membuka ruang, membuka peluang untuk bisa saling membuka ruang dengan perguruan tinggi yang lain. Semoga kegiatan-kegiatan ini bisa memberikan kesempatan juga untuk saling memahami culture masing-masing dari setiap para peserta. Mungkin tadi ada dari Thailand, ada dari Vietnam, kemudian ada dari Uzbekistan, kemudian juga ada dari Mesir ya, dengan berbagai kebiasaan dan tradisi masing-masing. Mudah-mudahan dalam saling pemahaman di dalam dunia global seperti ini bisa memberikan kesempatan yang luar biasa bagi kita untuk saling memajukan.
Alright, the university is located in the central of Jakarta, is the capital of Indonesia, and it's got 9 faculties running at the moment. And all the faculties have got the same commitment for international collaborations. And such program is hopefully able to develop kind of intercultural understandings, as we've got participants from different countries. Hopefully throughout the program, the participants can engage and can understand each other's culture.
Terakhir, selamat mengikuti kegiatan ini, selamat saling berinteraksi. Semoga Allah Subhanahu wa taala senantiasa memberikan kesehatan kepada kita seluruhnya. Terima kasih. Billahi fisabilillah wastabiqul khairat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
For the last part, I think everyone has understood. It would really welcome you all and hope that everyone enjoys the program. Thank you.
Baik, terima kasih banyak kepada Ibu Dr. Lali Kodaria yang telah menyempatkan waktunya untuk bergabung dengan kami di acara webinar pada hari ini. While waiting for our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Sabine Little, PhD, please allow us to present you the promotional video of our beloved university, Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka University.
Kiai Haji Ahmad Dahlan, pendiri Perserikatan Muhammadiyah yang memiliki spirit mencerdaskan, mencerahkan, dan berkemajuan sejak dulu hingga sekarang. Buya Hamka, sosok ulama intelektual bangsa yang menginspirasi kami membentuk generasi muda yang unggul dalam kecerdasan spiritual, intelektual, emosional, dan sosial. Universitas Muhammadiyah Profesor Dr. Hamka atau biasa disebut UHAMKA hadir di tengah-tengah kota metropolitan Jakarta dengan lokasi perkuliahan yang mudah dijangkau berbagai sarana transportasi ibu kota. Kemudahan aksesibilitas meningkatkan efektivitas agar generasi muda bisa lebih mudah mendapatkan pendidikan yang lebih berkualitas. UHAMKA, universitas yang mengedepankan nilai al-Islam dan kemuhammadiyahan dalam proses belajar mengajar dan di segala aspek kehidupan, untuk membentuk lulusan yang unggul secara intelektual maupun spiritual.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dengan lisensi akreditasi A yang kami miliki, lulusan UHAMKA bisa dengan mudah memasuki dunia kerja yang serba kompetitif maupun sukses dalam berwirausaha. Karena UHAMKA membekali pribadi setiap lulusan berkarakter, cerdas, kreatif, dan inovatif di era industri 4.0 yang serba digital.
UHAMKA memiliki 10 fakultas dengan sarana dan prasarana perkuliahan modern seperti Fakultas Farmasi dan Sains, didukung oleh tenaga pengajar ahli dengan sarana dan prasarana perkuliahan yang modern untuk mencetakkan lulusan yang handal dalam penelitian kesehatan.
Alasan saya memilih di UHAMKA adalah karena alat-alat yang lengkap dan tenaga-tenaga pengajar di sini adalah dosen-dosen yang profesional.
Salah satu studi unggulan adalah penelitian uji kehalalan bahan makanan. Bidang penelitian ini sering menjadi rujukan perusahaan besar dalam menentukan kehalalan suatu produk. Fakultas Ilmu Kedokteran dengan fasilitas laboratorium yang komprehensif menerapkan sistem belajar mengajar yang selalu bersinergi antara pengembangan teori dengan praktek perkuliahan. Fakultas Ekonomi dan Bisnis membentuk lulusan yang handal di bidang ekonomi dan bisnis keislaman dengan salah satu studi yang diterapkan adalah filantropi keislaman. Sarana perkuliahan juga dilengkapi dengan perpustakaan dengan bahan pembelajaran yang fokus pada studi ekonomi, akuntansi, manajemen, serta perbankan keislaman. Selain itu, terdapat juga laboratorium bank syariah. Fakultas Teknik menerapkan sistem pembelajaran yang mengasah kecerdasan dan kemahiran mahasiswa dalam menguasai bidang studi pilihannya, sehingga dapat berkontribusi langsung pada kemajuan teknologi serta mempersiapkan masuk dunia kerja. Selain itu juga agar mereka mampu mengukir prestasi pada berbagai kompetisi inovasi teknologi.
Kami dari program studi teknik elektron, dan alhamdulillah inilah hasil karya kita, robot pemadam api.
Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan. Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan memberikan pendidikan secara intensif kepada calon tenaga pengajar maupun pendidik sehingga setiap lulusan memiliki kecakapan sikap, pengetahuan, keterampilan umum, dan keterampilan khusus pada skala nasional maupun internasional, meneruskan reputasi UHAMKA sebagai penyedia profesi guru yang handal dan terpercaya.
Alasan saya kuliah di sini karena akreditasi A. Kelah di sana segala gitu, daftar di UHAMKA.
Dalam mencetak profesi guru yang profesional, proses perkuliahan didukung oleh fasilitas dan metode perkuliahan terkini, mempersiapkan tenaga pengajar yang dapat berkontribusi langsung pada kesejahteraan masyarakat, membentuk masa depan generasi muda bangsa yang cerdas. Fakultas Agama Islam. Fakultas Agama Islam hadir membentuk tenaga pengajar pendidikan agama Islam yang juga mampu mengelola lembaga berbasis keislaman. Fakultas Psikologi mengembangkan ilmu psikologi yang terintegrasi dengan nilai Islam untuk menghadirkan lulusan yang unggul di berbagai profesi ilmu psikologi. Fakultas Ilmu-Ilmu Kesehatan menghasilkan tenaga kesehatan yang unggul melalui pengembangan ilmu-ilmu kesehatan untuk meningkatkan kesejahteraan serta kesehatan masyarakat. Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik dengan program studi utama ilmu komunikasi membentuk lulusan yang unggul di berbagai bidang ilmu komunikasi dengan dukungan pengajar profesional serta fasilitas perkuliahan yang dibuat sama dengan dunia kerja nyata, sehingga setiap lulusan dapat kompetitif memasuki dunia kerja sekaligus mempunyai jiwa entrepreneurship dalam upaya untuk meningkatkan kesejahteraan masyarakat.
Saya mengambil jurusan ini karena fasilitas di FISIP UHAMKA sangatlah menunjang kebutuhan mahasiswa. Masuk UHAMKA, kalian nggak akan nyesal.
Sekolah Pasca Sarjana UHAMKA. Sekolah Pasca Sarjana UHAMKA menjawab tantangan para mahasiswa dan pekerja yang ingin mengejar jenjang pendidikan yang lebih tinggi, juga untuk meningkatkan profesi dan kompetensi bekerja.
Saya memilih UHAMKA karena untuk menunjang pendidikan dan karir saya ke depan, dan karena terakreditasi A sehingga membuat saya yakin untuk memilih kampus ini.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pusat Neuroscience UHAMKA adalah lembaga yang mengkhususkan diri untuk mengkaji bagaimana ilmu tentang otak dan perilaku manusia diaplikasikan di berbagai bidang, seperti leadership, marketing, edukasi, dan sebagainya. Pusat Neuroscience UHAMKA adalah satu dari sangat sedikit lembaga yang mengkaji bidang itu di Indonesia. Jika ada di antara rekan-rekan semuanya yang ingin mendalami tentang otak manusia, silakan bergabung ke UHAMKA.
UHAMKA, universitas yang membentuk generasi muda yang unggul dalam kecerdasan intelektual dan spiritual, menyongsong persaingan global terhadap tenaga profesional di era industri 4.0. UHAMKA lebih utama.
The University of Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka has 10 faculty and 48 study program. Each of the study program is credible and accredited while also considering the spiritual aspects. Now we have finally arrived on the main agenda. I would like to invite our moderator for today, our very own lecturer of the English Education Department of Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka University, Mrs. Nurhandayani Supraptinisi.
Okay, thank you, Farah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Allahumma shalli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Rabbi shrahli sadri wa yassirli amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Amma ba'du. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first day from a series of 5-day short course in UHAMKA, in English Study Program, University of Muhammadiyah Professor Dr. Hamka. Well, before we start, or before I introduce our great speaker for today, let me share or let me inform you some rules before we follow the explanation and then all of the material from our speakers. Well, the speaker will explain all of the material, and then will be a break in the middle. And then after all of the material have been delivered, you may have the questions after the session or after the speaker have already finished with the explanation. But don't worry, if you have questions in the middle of the explanation, we allow you to write down all of the questions in the chat and the link in slide.do that will have provided by the committee in the chat. Well, let me introduce our speakers that right now is already with us now. Hello, Sabine. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Yes. Good morning. Good afternoon. Yes, here it's good afternoon. Good morning. It's still morning in London, in the Sheffield, right?
In Sheffield, yes, it's 8 o'clock in the morning here.
Oh, it's a very early morning. Well, yeah. Let me introduce our speakers. Great speakers is Dr. Sabine Little. She is from the School of Education, the University of Sheffield. She is a Deputy Director of Learning and Teaching, lecturer in Educational Studies in Language Education, Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, the Director MA Education, Teaching and Learning, and Director IPGCE, and Faculty of Social Sciences Students Engagement Advisory Fellow. Is it correct, Sabine? It is.
Thank you. Yes.
All of the. Well, I found the profile of Sabine. Let me read your profile, Sabine, from the Sheffield University website. His interest of research. There are a lot of interest in research. That is multifaceted and overlapping. You mentioned in the research interest. But one of the research interests is about the digital instructional material. Am I right? Well, no longer we have the introduction. So please, Sabine, to start and give the material. It is related to the developing digitalized instructional materials, principles, and guidelines. For Dr. Sabine Little, time and floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Let me just start off. There you go. I think you can now see the slides that I am sharing. Yes, thank you for the lovely introduction. As I was very kindly introduced, I am a lecturer in languages education, and I have worked in online and digital learning for over 20 years now. So actually my work in this field predates the internet. And it has been very interesting for me over the last 20 years to see how language learning and all online and digital learning has changed and been shaped by technology. and how our pedagogical thinking had to change to move with it and to make sure that we always put the pedagogy first before technology. At times, it can be very tempting to see new technologies and think, oh, I must use this because this looks really interesting and really exciting. But what I'm hoping to talk about today is how to let the pedagogy lead when we develop digital instructional materials. How do we think about the pedagogy first and keep the technology in service to the pedagogy and not the other way around? So before I started working in online and digital education, I was a languages teacher at school. And one of my research interests is very much in the area of learner motivation and online social elements. And today I will be combining all these different interests and share a little bit about my thoughts on instructional designs. I'm very much aware that we have people from many different countries and also many different contexts. So rather than focusing on one particular field, I have tried to keep the principles and guidelines generic so that all of you can apply them to your own contexts so that hopefully the talk will be meaningful regardless of what sector or what country or what context you are working in. So what I will be doing today is to talk about some models of material design. And actually the very first one I will be looking at goes before the internet. And that goes back to my thinking that actually instructional design did not start with online and digital learning. It predates online and digital learning by many, many decades. Then we will be looking at the different affordances of technology to support different language skills. And we will actually do that throughout and consider how we can use technology to support listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and make use of some of the creative opportunities that technology offers us. And in doing that, I have presented some practical examples from my own work, which I hope will be useful to help us consider and talk about the different technologies that are available, but also the underpinning pedagogy that underlies that technology use. And as has already been said, please feel free to use the chat at any time to type any questions that we will pick up at the end of the session. So I will be talking for about an hour and a half, but I will be at some point pausing for a little bit on one slide because I would like you to have a look at it and reflect on it. So that's your chance to have a little bit of a breather. I won't be talking non-stop at you for an hour and a half, I hope. Okay, so the very first thing I want us to consider is, what does teaching in a digital world mean? And in your context, how do you use teaching in a digital world? And maybe if the moderator, if I don't have to try and undo scribbles on screen while I'm talking, that would be really helpful. If you annotate the screen, that's fine by me, but if you could undo it afterwards, that would be great, because otherwise by the end of the talk, we will have a lot of scribbles on the screen potentially. So in terms of teaching in a digital world, what does it mean for you in your particular context? Are you thinking about digital as added value to face-to-face teaching? So is your particular context teaching face-to-face, but you are thinking about how you might use technology in this context? Or are you using digital as a core aspect, core component of your face-to-face teaching? Are you essentially working in a hybrid context where some of the teaching takes place in the classroom, but some of the teaching and learning takes place online? And I think during COVID, we have all had at least some instances where our teaching has moved to online teaching. Now, in my context, I teach a lot completely online. So the third idea is that is your context that actually all your teaching is through the digital medium. That's what many people did and had to do during COVID. And I think as a result of this, the way we think and the way we explore digital technology has changed. So I think it's worth considering in what ways our thinking about technology has changed due to COVID, because the drive to incorporate digital technology has advanced digital teaching, certainly in the UK, by a good 10 years. Teachers and lecturers who were less interested in using technology were forced to use technology. And as a result of this, our pedagogical understanding, our thinking has advanced significantly over the past 18 months or so. So when I talk today, have a think about what digital actually means in your context and whether you are addressing this from an added value. Do you see your teaching as face-to-face and the digital component is just an add-on? Is it a core aspect of your face-to-face teaching, or is it actually, as we say in English, the nuts and bolts, the actual core business of your teaching? Because that will have different implications on the technical skills that you require of your students, the role that technology plays, the social aspects of learning, and the way in which you support your students' language skills. So we'll start at the very, very beginning and actually thinking about every time you are wondering whether to use technology and whether to use a particular type of technology. This matrix is, it might look complex, but actually it's very straightforward. I use it as a thinking tool every time I'm thinking of developing an online piece of work for my students. And you can see it operates on two axes. And I will actually use the annotation myself here. So you can look at, is it hard to develop? How much time is it going to take me to make this work? Or is it going to be easy to develop? Is it not going to take a long time? So that's your axis here. Whereas here is your idea of reusability. Is this going to be a one-off? Will you actually never ever use this again? Are you creating a resource just as a one-off? Or are you creating a resource that you will get a lot of use out of ultimately? And this very quick matrix gives you an immediate idea of whether it is worth you spending time and energy on the creation of a particular resource or a particular technology. For example, if you are thinking of introducing your students to using a new technology, whether that is Padlet or Jamboard or an online quiz system, all of this comes at the cost of spending time to get your learners to understand a new system. So if it is something that you will reuse again and again, and that is easy to develop, great, no question at all, go for it. Use that piece of technology, use that resource. If it's hard to develop, but you know you will use it again and again, think about it, and do the costs of developing it outweigh the benefits of reusing it, or the other way around? And on the basis of that, decide. If it is something that is very easy to use or develop, but you won't reuse it ever again, then okay, again, have a think about it. If it is something that will take you a long time to develop and you will never use it again, just don't go there. Just don't waste your time and energy on it. So this is just one way of considering before we even start talking about how we use technology, to consider whether it is going to be worth it. Let me go back to my mouse here. So before we've even talked about how to use technology, I might have talked you out of using technology altogether. So the point of this little matrix is to make sure that you are not driven by the idea of, oh, this is a nice gadget, this looks snazzy, and it ends up being something that costs a lot of time and a lot of work for very little benefit. But once we have decided, yes, we will develop something, let's have a look at instructional design and the concept of instructional design. And I want to go back right to 1991. As I said, it predates the internet. And Briggs talks about instructional design very much from a holistic perspective. So when we look at material design, we are not thinking about putting a worksheet together. We are not thinking about creating one individual task. We are looking at holistically the entire process of, as he says, the analysis of learning needs and goals. So even when we use technology, we put the pedagogy first. What do we want our learners to learn? That is very much at the core and will remain at the core throughout the rest of the talk. So what do we want our learners to learn? What are the goals? And we look at this holistically and cyclically. So we then think about what do we need to design in order to develop these resources in order to meet the needs. So our instructional design must be needs driven. It must address the learning goals of our students, and it needs to be responsive to context. So it says here at the bottom, it includes the development of instructional materials and activities and tryout and revision of all instruction and learner assessment activities. So in this one paragraph, actually, we have the principles of instructional design, and it starts with the learning needs and the learning outcomes that we're wanting students to meet, goes through the design process of the materials, then considers how students engage with these materials through activities, and then explores these activities and revision. So even after we have designed something, it does not end there, because every time our learners use it, we consider, we rethink, and we revise our materials, and then consider how we know that students have met the learning needs, which includes assessment activities as well. So when we think about instructional design, I've put together a little clear, there you go, I can do my little annotation again, of a clear approach to designing learning materials. And in designing our materials, we must consider that whatever we design is contextual. So it has to be fit for purpose. It has to be fit for our learners, our learning goals, and the outcomes that we want our learners to achieve. It has to be language appropriate. And I mentioned earlier that you will all be in different contexts. I don't know whether we have somebody here who might be working in a school rather than a higher education institute, but the levels of language that our learners engage with will be very, very different. And I run sessions for primary school learners, right through to secondary school, through to university. So when we think about materials, there are different considerations in terms of potentially games-based designs. You know, are we thinking about quizzes? Are we thinking about long writing? Are we thinking about drag and drop matching of things? How much technology knowledge do we need students to have? But predominantly, how much language knowledge are we expecting students to have? And how can we scaffold this? How can we support this? Because we want our learners to learn through the designs that we create. We don't want to necessarily teach them in the classroom and then have them use technology just to reinforce something they already know. In a perfect world, our learning design will actually aid the learning itself and not just be an add-on for technology's sake. So to get to the E of my clear learning design approach, it must be evidence-based. So I've already spoken about pedagogical underpinnings. We need to understand why we are using this approach, this technology, this method, rather than just saying, oh, I found this cool technology piece and I'm going to use it. It must be agile. Now, I have to admit, originally I put responsive, but then my clear didn't work as well. And agile is pretty much a synonym of responsive. So agile means we are flexible and responsive to learners. So whatever we create, we must understand that it is not fixed. It's not something that we create and then it's done. It is something that evolves and is flexible through our learning design. And it might be that it evolves from one year to the next. So we design something for one class, and then the next class that we teach maybe a year later, we look at and decide that is no longer serving its purpose. Or it might be that even within the same class, our learners engage with it, we realize it's not working the way we want it to, or the students are giving us new ideas, and we are agile, flexible and responsive in adapting what we are doing. And then finally, it has to be relevant. And this draws back on the sense of self-determination theory. We know that from looking at motivational theories, that our language learners, all learners, learn best if they understand that what they are doing is relevant. And you can express relevance for different reasons. You can say this is relevant for the exam. That would be a very extrinsically motivated way of selling an activity to students. Or it could be motivational through relevance for learner development and later life. But helping learners understand why they should engage with this resource will help with that actual engagement. So moving on from this very straightforward, clear anagram or analogy, I want to look at actually another model of learning design. And this is by Gilly Salmon. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this model because I want to talk through the different stages. What Gilly Salmon has done is, just like Briggs advisors, she has thought about the different aspects of instructional design. So what happens before our learners even start? Now, in terms of access, what do our learners need to know? In terms of motivation, why are our learners there in the first place? She's then thinking about, the reason I'm talking about Gilly Salmon's model is because when Briggs developed his instructional design model, that was before the internet. Whereas Gilly Salmon's model is specifically aimed at online learning and teaching. So she incorporates aspects of online socialization. How can we create learner communities online? And that will have different relevance depending on whether the online is only a small part of your teaching and learning, or whether, like in my teaching, it is everything. I have on my program 70 students from 35 different countries who have never seen each other and will never see each other. So how do you drive learning and teaching forward in that context? And how do you create a community so that the learners don't feel they are learning individually, just them and their computer? How do you drive forward aspects of online socialization? And I will be spending some time on this because even if you are in the classroom, creating an online environment and making sure that the online aspect is integrated into the social aspects of face-to-face teaching is an important consideration. The information exchange then talks about the nuts and bolts, essentially what materials are there to meet the learning goals of a unit. And knowledge construction is about how students engage with the learning materials and create knowledge. And I will argue that actually that knowledge construction happens collaboratively in a perfect world. Unless you are interested in only designing something for learners to engage independently, then knowledge construction and an ongoing social environment are linked. And then finally, aspects of development. How do you understand that your learners have met the learning needs, and how do you need to engage with this? So let's have a look at Gilly Salmon's model in a bit more detail. Here it is. Here is what Gilly Salmon herself says. And I find if you see this first, it looks a bit confusing. So I thought I would introduce it first in a different way, because actually what I like about this model is that Gilly Salmon explores not just what the learners are doing, but also the role of the teacher. And that is these bits here. Hang on. Yeah. No, go back. It doesn't want me to do. Okay, it insists on not letting me use my lovely annotator anymore. Rather than messing with that, I'll just carry on talking, and then I might come back to that and explore that in a little bit. So you can see in blue That is the role of the teacher. As Gilly Salmon calls it, the e-moderator. I have to admit, I'm not 100% happy with that term, because I think it depends on what learners you have, whether you are just moderating or whether you are taking a more active role. Although Gilly Salmon also, under knowledge construction up there under stage 4, talks about facilitating. So actually, the various different aspects of the teacher are incorporated. So if I go from the bottom to the top, when it comes to access and motivation, these are the very first steps when our learners engage with our materials. And the role of the e-moderator or teacher are welcoming and encouraging. Then for online socialization, the idea of familiarizing the learners with the learning environment, the different cultural differences that the learners might have, so managing expectations. Then when it gets to the information exchange, so the actual engagement with the materials, to make sure that the materials are understood. This might involve some actual teaching and tutoring. For the knowledge construction then, it is more of a facilitating process, because we all construct knowledge in different ways. And for the teacher to engage with this means understanding our learners. And I will say a little bit more about that later. And then finally, under development at the top there, the role of the tutor in supporting the students, but also being responsive. And it's not just the development of the learners, but also the development of the learning resources. And then the reason I like this model is that it also includes core considerations for technical support. And again, you will all come from very, very different contexts. But if you are anything like me and you are working in online learning environments, you will have had varying technical support over the years. And sometimes it's all down to you. And sometimes you have somebody helping you. Right now in the School of Education, we have a wonderful educational technology support learning developer called Hadrian. And he is highly skilled in both pedagogy and technology. So at the moment, I'm in the very lucky position that if I need technical support, I can go to him and I can say, can you help me make this work? But I have also, over the years, spent an awful lot of hours, days, weeks, months, years, learning about different technologies, trying to find the best technology for something. So it is important to understand the role of technical support in the development of instructional design, because I think we have, as educators, a role in arguing for pedagogically skilled technical support, in making sure that teachers are not expected to be good teachers, be good online teachers, be great at understanding technology, but then also having the technological skills of keeping up to date with all technology, knowing how to use it, knowing how to integrate it. I, for example, had to learn coding in order to create some of my own designs. I had to learn how to embed different resources and different designs. In this day and age, in a perfect world, there should be support available for this. So this model might help in thinking through what technical support do you need in developing instructional design, and where might you get this support, if at all possible. Okay, so from now, I want to spend some time looking at the actual model. And we'll go through the steps at the beginning, one by one. But then later I will argue that actually it gets a bit tricky to look at them one by one. So at the very bottom, at the first level, before our learners even start, we need to think about access and motivation. And I'm actually going to start with motivation because that underpins everything we do. Why are our learners taking our course? Why are they there in the first place? And that refers to, as I was talking earlier, motivational theories. And in some instances, for example, in school contexts and in some university contexts, sometimes they are there because they do not have a choice. And that can be a very tricky learning environment to work with. If your students actually are not motivated to be there at all, then you might have a bit of an uphill struggle when it comes to working with these learners. But it is important to understand this. And when we look at motivation, we often talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. If you are lucky enough to teach English language in an institution where your learners have chosen this as your pathway, and they are highly motivated and they see their future as working in international contexts, etc., and they are intrinsically motivated, then great, you have one kind of learner. If you are teaching in an institution where all learners have to take English lessons, whether they want to or not, and you are teaching the course with all the students who do not want to be there, then it might be that extrinsic motivation and just acknowledging, well, you have to be there, is one answer to engage your students. So have clear expectations and pathways in your instructional design. It means that sometimes our instructional design for intrinsically motivated students might be more aspirational and stretch learners more. Whereas sometimes learners who we know are just there because they have to meet certain outcomes, we have to be clear with them as to how these outcomes can be met. We can still stretch them, but we need to understand their reasons and their motivations. And I think it is very helpful to do that collectively and give them an opportunity to share their motivations for being there in that program. And there is a little bit more on that later. And then finally, the second stage of access and motivation is the technological and technical affordances. And that includes the actual technology that your learners need. So make sure that your learners know any requirements that they have to meet. And again, you are all in different contexts. And we are quick to assume that all our learners will have solid internet, that they will have a laptop, that they will have the capacity to take part in online video conferencing. During COVID in the UK, we found that many of our students do not. And I know that you will be working in many different contexts. We have learned that many of our students access online technology on their phones. So how much are you expecting them to read online, for example? So an understanding of the technology that the students use and that they have access to. And if it is an optional module, if they have a choice to be there, they need to know this as they make the choice so that they're not suddenly required to, they can make an informed choice. Can I get a laptop in order to take part in this course? Or would I rather take a different course? And also thinking about what skills you want your learners to already have in terms of technology, and what skills you are happy to develop with your learners. So for example, presumably you might expect that all your learners will be able to send an email. Okay, great. Would you expect all your learners to be able to use a specific app or attach an image or record a video and upload it somewhere? We'll be talking about various creative uses of technology. And if you are expecting your learners to show those skills, for example, if one of your learning outcomes is create a video, upload it, and share it with your peers, you either need to be clear that that is a skill that you expect your learners to have when they start on the module, or you need to support the technological skills, not just the language skills. So you need to think about in your instructional design, not just where do your language skills feature, but how does the technological skill develop? And I've put here planning for gradual introduction. What I do on my programs, because they are fully online, it is absolutely vital that my learners can use those technologies. Because if they can't, I lose them. They cannot participate in the program. And I cannot see them every week to find out who has caught up and who knows what they're doing and who can use the technologies. Sometimes I lose students because they can't use the technology, and I have to find out why. So we start out on an online discussion board just with messages. And then over the first 2 weeks, we gradually build up the skills and say, okay, for this task, I want you to practice doing this. I want you to practice doing that. And that might include attaching an image, recording a video, using the library. And it gets progressively more difficult because the skills develop. And then finally, as part of the technological affordances and thinking, the troubleshooting, in which language will that take place? And obviously, if your students, different institutions will have different rules or engagements. So in some, I know in some courses, the students are required to use English at all times. But if you're struggling with the language and you are struggling with the technology, and you haven't got the language to express your technological difficulties, then it gets very, very tricky. So consider how troubleshooting will happen and in what language it will happen. And whatever it is, again, be clear to your students how this works. Make sure that you incorporate aspects of troubleshooting. Okay, we're coming to what is probably one of my favorite aspects of learning design, and that is, as I mentioned earlier, online socialization, making sure that we have an actual group of learners, a community of learners, and not a whole bunch of individual learners. And what is a blessing in English language teaching is that all these social aspects actually support language learning as well. If we are constructing them and if we are using them in English, then any social activity just helps incorporating more English into the program, into the module, into the design. So for example, I start all my learners at the beginning of the new course. They are sharing hopes and dreams. They introduce themselves, they say where they're from, where they're working, because all of my students are teachers, and they share their hopes and dreams for the course. What do they want to get out of it? Sometimes they share their hopes and fears, which sounds a bit more negative. But in doing that, it really helps me. On the one hand, I get a really good idea of why my students are there when it comes to motivation, as we were talking about earlier. I know by the end of this exercise, I understand what my students are wanting to get out of the course, which really helps me thinking about instructional design and the way I teach. But I also get a good idea of their language skills, because they have to immediately express themselves, and they can do so in a planned way. We do this in writing. So the learners have an opportunity to think about it in advance, to prepare it. And it creates a social atmosphere, because not only do I get to know my learners, because it is shared online, they all get to know each other, and they start making connections. Some of them might be parents, and some of them are, oh, I've got an 8-year-old daughter as well. Or somebody might say, in my spare time, I go climbing. Somebody might say, I teach maths to 18-year-olds, and somebody else might connect with that. So essentially, we are all social creatures. And this exercise helps our students to connect with each other and start to take control of their learning environment in a non-threatening way. It's not tied to any learning outcome on paper, but actually in reality, it is a core underpinning principle. So that's the very, very first thing that I do, although I will have more examples. And it also, the reason I use a lot of online socialization is that it makes expectations very clear. I expect my learners to participate online. They are part of a learner community, and just because they are distance learners does not mean that it's a lonely endeavor. It's not a lonely experience for them, or it's not meant to be. So I want to set the scene from the very first day that I expect them to take part in the group community activities that are part of that. And that continues throughout the year with varying interaction. And depending on your learning environment, you can create online socialization that takes part in groups, in pairs, with a tutor, in real time. You can include video conferencing, so you can have different language skills, spoken or written. You can give students time to prepare something, or you can do it spontaneously. Or you can do a hybrid where you tell them roughly what you will do, but then they have to respond spontaneously on the day. So in that way, you can integrate lots and lots of different language goals into online socialization. And I just want to spend a little bit more time on this by going through some examples that have worked for me really well over the years, because I think we all too often gloss over these aspects. We very often have, maybe in the first lesson, we have, okay, everybody introduce yourself. And then we think, right, go on with the materials, go on with the course, with the unit, with the program. Whereas actually, we know that if we spend time building a community, we build motivation, we build interest in the language, and therefore that actually then makes the teaching later on much easier, because we are not constantly spending time trying to get the group to interact with each other. So it is definitely worth spending some extra time on this. So I'm just going to show some examples on my program. The very first thing I ask students to do is to introduce themselves, and they do that with the hopes and dreams. But I've also got a Google map on my program, and the students are asked to place a marker where they are. And then I've not shared that, but they then share their piece of writing. So actually, if I went on to every single one of these, I could click on them and an image of a student would come up where they, and then a piece of writing where they introduce themselves. But what I also do is, in terms of building a community, on the right-hand side, you can see one of my students who is in Madagascar. And I ask all students to print out or take on a tablet this sign, I am a School of Education student in and then they write in where they are. And over the first week of the program, I challenge them to go somewhere that is important to them. And it can be something that they consider is representative of their place of work or their country or their life, or it can be simply a place that they really like. And this student, you can see she's in Madagascar. You have a chameleon there posing with her. I was very impressed that she managed to get a chameleon into the shot. And these images for my online learners immediately bring the offline and the online together. It shares with my students this idea that, yes, you are an online learner, and yes, all our interaction lives in your laptop or computer, but I know that you are a real person out there in the world somewhere with your own interests, your own knowledge, your own understanding, and you immediately give students agency in choosing a place where to take this picture. But because they all have this sign saying, I'm a School of Education student in, it's also a sense of community. So at the end, you have all these images from all over the world. You have this map with all the markers, and you can see this is my program this year. This is where all these learners are. And it helps the students recognize that they are part of a global learning community, and they also use an awful lot of English in the process of introducing themselves. And some of my learners are actually native English speakers, but many are not. So it's an opportunity to level the playing field a little bit. And I mentioned skills. For this one, obviously, they have to interact with a Google map. So when I think about designing this, I have to think, okay, they have to use the Google map, they have to take an image, and they have to upload it on the discussion board. We use Blackboard as an institutional online platform. So actually in doing this, they have to use a lot of technological skills that will then be important later on. But by embedding it in a social activity, it doesn't become as threatening. It's not a, this week I want you to practice uploading an image. I'm just saying, you know, this is what I want you to do for this activity. I want you to introduce yourself. And for that, you have to upload an image. It makes it relevant to the context. It's not an activity for activity's sake. So there we are. We have our learners, we know where they are, and they have introduced themselves. Great. Something else that I do is a language portrait, because most of my students are teachers themselves. And if you are all teaching English in a context where English is another language, then you essentially have a whole bunch of learners who speak multiple languages, and every single person in this room does. And my research, when I'm not talking about online teaching and learning, is about language, identity, and belonging. So a language portrait is an opportunity for learners to understand how different languages interact. I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on it, but I wanted to quickly mention this as an example for, again, incorporating the online and the offline. So, for example, in this instance, I did this with a child, actually. And this child said that English lived in the head. That's why English is yellow and English is in the head. Because he said English is where he goes to school, and he understands that, you know, he uses his head most for English. But then German, French, Spanish, Chinese, they were all languages that he said he was wearing like clothes and he could exchange. They were all languages that he was learning. And he was getting very creative in talking about his different languages. And then at the bottom, Russian this child said, he didn't speak any Russian, but he included Russian to say that he considered himself multilingual and was looking at adding a language that he didn't yet speak, and wanted to illustrate that language by saying that, yes, he is indeed multilingual. So here is one opportunity to get your learners to complete a language portrait, and how they interact with this, again, is an opportunity to drive forward different language learning skills. They can then write about it as an essay. They could narrate a PowerPoint. They could make a film. So you can support listening, speaking, reading, or writing through the exercise of asking your learners how their different languages interact with them. So for anybody interested, the reference is there for people to look at. So I would argue that actually socialization is the red thread that guides everything through, that guides your learners through all their learning, rather than something that we do very quickly early on. The more online you work, the more this social element becomes important. And something that I do all the time, every week, excuse me, is what I call a reflective nudge. So my learners every week get something new to engage with. And none of these are assessed in any way, shape, or form. They are just a way to keep the social element going. They are all relevant to the program, and as such, it means that they are an opportunity for keen learners to stretch. So as an example, here is one that I might use if I ran this over an extended period of time. One of this article might be one of my reflective nudges. And I might say, oh, everybody, before we meet again, have a read of this, and on the discussion board, share your thoughts. Have you ever kept a diary? What do you think? Would it be useful for you, for your learners? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? So, and to do so, take part in this particular reflective nudge, you would all have to read a fairly high level language piece of work, think and create a piece of writing. So, but the point of it is understanding the group and socialization. And the language is part that is needed to drive the group forward. So it is about making things relevant to this particular context. So in my program, we do a lot of things to do with learning and teaching, because our students are all, my students are all teachers. So one week we might say, how do you use rewards and punishment in your classroom? Now, how do your learners know that they did well? Are there any strategies? If they're, because most of them are teaching in a school. So does your school have a policy linked to rewards and sanctions? And they discuss all of this in English, and they learn an awful lot about global pedagogy, and they also learn about their own attitudes towards rewards and sanctions. So reflective nudges are a way of incorporating all these things. I've mentioned earlier that actually we've now moved, we spent quite a bit of time on points 1 and 2 of Gilly Salmon's model. And I've mentioned that I see levels 3, 4, and 5, information exchange, knowledge construction and development, as iterative, cyclical. They just keep going. So it doesn't stop. It just keeps going and going and going. So while we might think that we are creating resources to support information exchange, actually in reality, we are also creating resources to inform knowledge construction, and then we are developing it, and all of it is underpinned by the social. So again, I want to spend just a little bit of time to think about these aspects in terms of what are our core learning outcomes. I've mentioned earlier that your learning outcomes are at the absolute beginning of everything that you do. What do you want your learners to do? Then what tasks do you need to design to meet these learning outcomes? Are you interested in language acquisition or language use? And are there any grammar focal points? We're going down to the language aspects now. Are there any aspects that they actually need to understand? And when it comes to designing a learning environment, within all of this takes place, as well as the social aspects. It's important to consider both the learning environment that you are creating for your learners in terms of a class or a course or a module, but also the learning environment that the learner constructs themselves. If some of your learning is face-to-face and some of your learning is online, then your learners are straddling, they are occupying these two spaces. And you need to make sure that in their heads, they are connecting those two aspects into one coherent module, course, or learning outcome. So when we design our learning environment, we need to think about how we best do that. And the materials that we use can be custom created by us, but they can also be curated, found somewhere else and adapted. And our learning environments typically have a specific focus and also are progressive. So we're thinking about where do our learners go from here? A learning environment isn't just 1 week to week. It is for however long our learners are together. And we need to think about how we use technology to do this, because if our learners are meeting across 10 weeks, 10 different technologies, and each week they're asked to follow a new link and leave comments somewhere else, and then they never return to that, to them, they will never revisit that aspect of their learning, and it's very difficult for them to see the progression. So I use Blackboard and integrate all the learning into that. So actually for the learners, it's very easy to go back after 4 or 5 months. And I can say, go back to our very first discussion and have a look what we did. In what ways have you grown? In what ways has your pedagogical understanding grown? So there are many different ways to consider. And I want to say a little bit about creation versus curation, because there are so many materials online, especially for English language learning, that very often we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to create all our own resources. And actually, if we take the learning outcome as the starting point, we can then curate, choose the best suited learning materials that are available and supplement them with our own creative materials to design a matrix that I will share in a minute. And it looks scary to start with, but we're going to spend quite a bit of time on it, of the remaining time on it. So to make sure that all the learning outcomes are addressed. So I'm going to show you this matrix in a minute, but before I do, I just want to quickly talk about, so we're going to be looking at the skills that we're wanting to do, the language skills. So in this case, listening, speaking, reading, writing. The actual tasks that we want learners to do, what language grammar points we want addressing, any external links to external materials, any adaptations potentially, something that we might have to create ourselves or adapt. How do we encourage differentiation? How are we going to assess this? What kind of opportunities are there for our learners to feed back to us? What are we learning from this process? So it's not just one way.
Mom.
we are all trying to grow as teachers. And then what is this social element as part of this? So here is the matrix itself. So all the things that I've talked about earlier are now at the top. Got skill, tasks, language and grammar, any external links to materials that were created elsewhere, any adaptations, differentiation, assessment, feedback, and the social element. And I've got the learning outcome, I've made one up at the top there. So I have created this matrix for one particular learning outcome. By the end of this unit, students will be able to confidently discuss their future career plans. That's a learning outcome. Okay, so this matrix tells us how we are going to do it. It's going to tell us what materials we need, why we are using them, as in what skills are we looking to develop, and how we are using them. But I also want to point out that not all the gaps here are filled in. It doesn't mean that this matrix has to be full all the time. There might be a learning outcome that has no specific listening task attached to it. For example, you don't have to cover all the skills at all time. Not everything has to be assessed all the time. So don't feel that your matrix is only full when everything is filled in. So you remember that I talked about information exchange, knowledge construction, and development are interactive. And actually what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes while I'm going to be quiet to have a think about, in your context, I'm going to show you the matrix again, and I'm going to ask you to have a little think about, where do you think information exchange happens? Where do you think knowledge construction might happen? And where do you think learner development and program development might happen? So I'm going to show you the matrix again. I'm going to be quiet for just 1 or 2 minutes while you have a little think.
Yeah, maybe the participants can have a picture of the matrix, maybe, Sabine, and then they can think over, and then they can think again what you need to think about it. Okay, yes, in all participants, you may have a picture of it, and then think about the question that Sabine said in the previous slide. How many minutes do you need?
Literally just a couple of minutes. I would have normally stopped by now again, so just a minute or two.
Okay. May I copy the instruction and then the previous slide, Sabine? So
yeah, I mean, I think we're done. You know, I think I'm ready to carry on, because it's just an opportunity to chat, because essentially it is, you know, it's up there: information exchange, knowledge construction, development. So and the point I was trying to make, and I'm just going to talk about this from one small aspect here, the formative peer feedback. This one single activity could be part of information exchange. No, if your students are engaging here, the task is to do mock interviews with each other and then to give each other feedback on running mock interviews with each other. And that could be part of information exchange, it could be part of knowledge construction, it could be part of development. So one important aspect is that this matrix tells us what materials, how we're going to use them and why we are using them, but it doesn't yet tell us in what order we are using them. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But before I move on, I just want to say a little bit about here, for example, I have highlighted all the potential resources or opportunities for resources. So as part of this one unit, there are resources that are created externally, so that the teacher has found and is adopting and adapting in a new context. It includes a resource that the teacher has created themselves. It includes a resource that the students go and curate, and it includes a resource that the students are creating themselves. And then ultimately, this is part of the assessment point, but actually this could be a resource as well. So what I wanted to talk about is essentially that when it comes to materials, not only do you not have to write them all, you can find some, but also your students might create some as well. And that is quite important when it comes again to relevance. So then I want to have just a little word about assessment and saying how important it is that your assessment includes both formative and summative assessment. And again, remember, this is not just one lesson. This is one unit. This is looking at one learning outcome, and you have to decide how you're going to achieve this. But within this outcome, there are opportunities for formative discussion, peer feedback. So there is engagement with peers, with a tutor, before there is a summative piece of work at the end. So when we create materials from scratch, we are still keeping them tied to our learning objectives, to the relevant curriculum, whatever that may be. We're considering the 4 skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, but that doesn't mean that every activity has to use all 4 skills. And we use the matrix to ensure that our activities tie to the relevant learning outcomes, that we know whether our students are constructing the knowledge that they need to construct. So we need a way for them to showcase this. We need to give them an opportunity to display that they have met the learning outcomes. And then potentially we need to assess that as well. We make sure that gaps are addressed, and that gives us an overarching view of student learning. So the matrix that you saw is just there as one thing, but lessons, the way we teach, is sequential. But learning actually isn't. Learning happens much more like the matrix in a patchwork thing. You know, we don't necessarily learn one thing completely and then we move on to the next one. So as we have the matrix to move on to the lesson plan, consider where your students are learning. And that includes time in class, time online, and time at home in their own time. So in my context, I have to throw out the idea of a class being the contact time. And I'm looking at when do my students learn and how can I facilitate this? So you are looking again at the learning holistically, in class, out of class, online, in self-study, in discussion with peers, and you use that to map your learning outcomes and your lesson plan. And then consider formative assessment together with feedback. And on the basis of that, you look at your matrix, which gives us, as I said, the what, the why, and the how. But moving on from that, so you start with your learning outcome, you make that big into your matrix, and you look at all the materials and how the learners engage with them. And then you make it small again into your lesson plan, because from this matrix, you then have to decide chronologically, how does this translate into something you can do in a class? And that will differ again from learners to learners. Before we close, I want to spend a little bit of time on some other considerations and techniques. And I'm going to touch very briefly on aspects of flipped learning, looking at students' personalities, looking at ways to involve students, helping your students keep track of their learning, and then I'm going to return to technical considerations. Each one of these is just one slide, and it's fairly short because we are winding down, and I'm looking forward to your questions. But to start off with flipped learning, for those of you who are not aware of the term, flipped learning means that you are expecting your learners to do their learning aspects, so acquire new vocabulary, engage with a task before they come to the classroom. And then you focus your face-to-face time on deepening understanding or discussions. So flipped learning means that actual knowledge acquisition happens in the student's own time or outside the classroom. Whereas in the classroom, you have opportunities for knowledge use and application. And whether or not this is useful to your context, I'll leave to you to decide. It's not something that necessarily works for every lesson, but I've put one paper there. I just wanted to mention the concept of flipped learning because I use it a lot, because in online learning, I don't really have sessions as such. So I have to expect my students to do some of their learning in their own time. So when we design and consider lessons, again, I mentioned throw out the idea of a timetable, throw out the idea that you have 2 hours of contact time, and instead consider what levels of understanding do you want your learners to develop at what points in the week or in the month, and how will that happen in homework or in self-study or in class time or in discussions, and think about your instructional design to incorporate flipped learning if it would be useful in your context. I've already talked about designing materials with your learners' personalities in mind, and I've talked a bit about aspects of self-efficacy and motivation. And the one thing that I really want to talk about is how actually learner-centered design requires us to know our learners, but also to potentially collaborate with our learners. And I've shared in the matrix opportunities for learners to share what they found in terms of resources and actually taking ownership and having agency as part of their learning environment. So I want to share, before we finish, some brief ideas to make sure. I've talked a lot about understanding relevance for your learners, helping them understand why they're there and what role they have in making the learning happen for the entire group, not just for themselves, but what role do they have within the learner group? And one such opportunity might be, for example, for the students to decide where do they need more input, what do they need to know more about, and then to design learning materials. We don't always have to be experts to design materials. Sometimes actually for students to design materials is a great opportunity for them to understand their own gaps and to address these either with help or individually. It might be that their learners are capable of identifying their own strength or strength in peers and say, oh, so-and-so is really good at this. Can you make a worksheet for us? Or can you make a task for us? Or can you make a video for us that explains this? So there are many opportunities to involve your learners in instructional design with support, of course. There are opportunities to design for peers. So for example, if you have parallel classes or within the same class, you could tell the entire group to everybody in small groups, construct an activity to practice one particular language point, and then discuss these activities and decide going forward which activity should be used in future years with other learners. And that allows your learners to discuss how they learn, what they find helpful, and it helps you understand how they learn as well. They might design something for near peers, so for learners in lower classes than they are, if it's a point that they now understand, but 2-3 years ago they didn't. Is there something they can design to help their peers in lower classes? And also asking them to curate, find a YouTube video that they found useful, explain why they found it useful, and use some class time to help students turn into designers, because it also helps students to understand why they are learning the way they are learning and to consider the pedagogy. If they think about how to design something for somebody else, they automatically think about how they learn, because you can't do one without the other. So by helping them design something for peers, you are also helping them understanding themselves and their learning better. I want to say a little bit about how to keep track, and I don't know how many of you have come across Padlets. They are free to use as long as you use them not too much. You can only have, I think, 6 Padlets without paying. But Padlets are a great way for students to create their personal learning environment. So for example, at the beginning of a lesson, of a unit, of a module, you can ask each learner to create a Padlet, and then the various tasks that they have to engage with throughout the unit, they can add each of these, you can click on, and it would lead to an extra post. So this is just a really, this is just one example that lives on Padlet as a gallery. But you can imagine each one of these being an activity, and it means that the work stays with the student even after they graduate. They still have all that information. So if it's something that is, for example, job specific, if it, is it something they can take forward as a letter of application somewhere or a CV, it means that they have access to all their own work forever, which is really useful. And then I just want to, before I come to some final points, talk about technical considerations. And I've mentioned already, depending on where you work, there will be different institutional rules regarding phone use, expectations of students, etc. The most amazing resource that you create won't help your learners, if they're inaccessible, and that includes financial cost, for example, data. I have worked with several students who rely on their mobile phones to take part in online video conferences. And if they have to do too many face-to-face video conferences, then their mobile data plan crashes and they just cannot participate. And technology remains an equity issue. So we still have to work to the lowest common denominator. We have to make sure that our students can access what we're asking them to access. Think about sustainability. So I mentioned Padlet. It's free to have up to 6, but if you're creating an amazing resource and your institution says, okay, we'll fund that for a couple of years to see how it goes, what happens after a couple of years if you're spending a lot of time and energy investing on a new resource? And then just a final word, we've seen during the pandemic issues around privacy, the use of cameras, the use of personal messages, etc. And I think I'm a firm believer that our students have a right to privacy. So for example, at the University of Sheffield, we do not enforce learners having their cameras on at all time because we don't know about their home environments. We don't know whether they have children. We don't know that they have, you know, they might live in a context where they don't want to share their camera. And again, even having a digital background adds to the bandwidth that they need. So it eats more data. So saying, oh, you can have a digital background doesn't actually solve all the problems. So I think, especially now, we have all become more aware of each other's needs. Right now, you can see a fairly tidy office, but I can tell you, if I turned this camera around, you would see an absolutely chaotic attic room because we put a dining table into our attic when we suddenly had to create an office. And I can see a hole in the roof from where I'm sitting. So this whole concept of being Zoom tidy is great as long as you only look into one direction. So just thinking about technical considerations, and then just some final points, which I think I have driven home throughout, but just mention them. The creation of learning materials is more than just the materials themselves. I think I've spent a lot of time talking about that. Think about equity and equitability, access, consider skills, and plan holistically for variety and for progression. Always keep your learning outcomes in mind so that they drive everything you do. Keep it real. Make sure that your students have a purpose for whatever it is that they're doing and work with them in order to improve materials. And then as a final point, put pedagogy first and technology second, no matter what you do. I hope that was interesting and I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm going to stop sharing now.
That is a very, very interesting and very detailed. Sometimes when we prepare the technology for teaching, we really use what you're saying, that it's about the background and then something that maybe it's full of, maybe become a problem for our students. That is a very interesting. And then the salmon, Gili salmon stage model, it is a very, that it's come to in our teaching. When we need to prepare the technology for our teaching, we should consider about that. We think a lot before we use the technology. Well, that is a very, very interesting and informative thing. That is something that is new. Well, I have some questions in my hand in here, Sabine, and well, I will read one question, but there is no name. The name that mentioned in the link. What should we do when in an online learning platform, students are not interested in engaging with online lesson due to the lack of person-to-person interaction? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, it's a really useful question. And I think we've all had it. And I'm saying, you know, I'm here as an expert in online teaching and learning. I have taught in classes where there has been very, very little interaction. So just a few ideas, very, very practical ideas. In an environment such as this. So, for example, could everybody in the chat give me a quick smiley face? Just right now, in the chat, a quick smiley face. I want to see how many smiley faces we can get to.
Oh, okay.
Just typing a little, there you go.
This one?
How many can we get? Boom. Oh, different smiley faces. That's awesome. We have some creativity there. Double smiles, cat's ears. Okay. Now, brilliant. Oh, I love seeing all of those. So this is a very, very quick way of what we call a flood, a chat flood. And you can use, I mean, I did it with a smiley face just because it was the very, very quickest. But in a class, what I might do was, okay, I'm going to give, we're not going to do this now. I'm just going to explain it now. I'm not going to ask everybody to do it. But I might say, okay, I think in an online environment, it is scary being the first person to interact. So what we want to do is we want to remove the barrier to, you know, if we're discussing and we say, oh, does anybody have any thoughts? And everybody sits there and goes,
no one does. Yes, yes.
So yes, we can use the reaction button. Thank you, Lakshmi. But we can also use a comment flood. So for example, what I might say in a class is, okay, I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes to write some quick notes about how would you use this in your class, or yeah, something that relates to the task. But you give students a couple of minutes and you say, but don't post yet, just type it in the chat box, don't post. So, okay, if I did this now, no, I would say, okay, everybody just type one word of, or a short sentence of, okay, yeah, let's do this now. So everybody take 1 minute to write something that you will take away from this session, something that you found useful. Okay, and I'm going to time it, actually take 2 minutes, and don't post yet, nobody post. And in 2 minutes, yeah, I'm starting a timer. In 2 minutes, I'm going to shout post, and then everybody posts at the same time. So take 2 minutes to write something that you will take away from this session, something that you might apply, something that you might use, something that you found useful. But don't post. Don't post yet. We'll post when we get to 2 minutes. Doesn't have to be long. Not yet. Don't post yet.
Okay.
Very eager. Yes. We're up to
Yes.
1 minute.
Yes, that's right. I need to imitate how you did this.
So yeah. Hope everybody's got some. There's still time to write something. Anything that you'll take away? 30 seconds to go.
2 minutes is long.
Yeah,
It's
2
like
minutes
forever.
is long, isn't it? It's really long. So actually, for students, it's a proper time to think about something quite detailed. It gives them time to formulate their thoughts, and it gives you time to reiterate the tasks. So we're down to the last 5 seconds. Everybody get ready, and post. Boom.
Great. Wow.
Okay, so for me, I wouldn't have got, I mean, we've got 231 people here, and I bet if I look, I'm not going to get 231 responses here.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But it gives me a really good opportunity to immediately check for understanding, for student learning. So, and a chat flood is one opportunity to engage learners. I talked a lot about a step approach. I think it's much easier with a new class because you can immediately give expectations and you say, okay, this is how this works. Now, you might say, I want you all to unmute all the time if your class is small. But if you have a class that has already sort of trickled down and is not engaging very much, and you're trying to turn that around, that can be quite tricky. And you want to create different opportunities. And something like a chat flood is a really quick opportunity. Something else that I do with my learners is, I do lots of things. So I have one class that is small, and I only have about 15 learners in that class. So for every class, I ask students to prepare something. And actually the language portrait was one of those things. So I said to students, okay, before the next lesson, this is a language portrait. This is how it works. I want you all to do one. And in the next class, one by one, you're going to unmute, share your camera, share your language portrait, and you're going to tell us about it. And because they knew it was coming, they had time to prepare. And that was their first lesson. So it immediately encouraged this idea, this is how my lessons work. In my lessons, I expect you to talk. I expect you to prepare. I expect you to share your thoughts. And we then had a comment flood, like we just did, on them thinking about what a language portrait would be good for, what it would be useful for. So there are different ways. You can do that with getting them to read an article, for example, in advance, and then say, okay, share a question that you have. Or, there are lots and lots of different ways to do a comment flood. And it's very non-threatening because everybody's in the same boat. You're not waiting for one person first. Something else that I found really useful is I have one Google Doc that runs through my entire module. And on there, I share the expectation for the next face-to-face lesson. And I also have a note there that says, any questions from you? So during the week, as the students are learning in their own context, they are adding their questions to the Google Doc. And if it's a very individual question, I will reply in the Google Doc to that learner. If it's a question that I think the whole group would benefit from, or that I think we could discuss, I will write as a comment, great question, we'll discuss that together the next lesson. And then again, you can do a comment flood and saying, do other people feel the same? And then ask people to unmute themselves, because you have one person who asked the question, you might prime them. You might say, okay, will you ask that question again in class? So, and once students see each other engaging, it's much easier for them to engage as well. So I hope, that was quite a long answer, but I hope it was a helpful answer to encourage different ways of participation and build on it all the time.
Yeah, that is quite interesting. So we practice directly. Well, the second question, after the second question, is it okay if one of the participants have a direct question to you, Sabine?
Of course.
Okay. Yeah. So one question from the participant first, who sent it in the chat and the link. It is dealing with the young learners, Sabine. The young learners. What can we do as ESL advocate at this moment during COVID-19, especially simple ESL for young learners by algorithm? What do you think about it?
So young learners is obviously stretchy. I mean, are young learners 5 or 10 or, you know, so because I think especially at that end, it doesn't matter so much if you're 18 or 30, but it matters if you're 5 or 10. But there are lots and lots of different ways. For example, I've not said a lot. Let me just, I recently did a very different presentation, which was mainly, okay, I'm just going to share a completely different presentation for a second. To just very quickly talk through some ideas. So this is all specifically, so there are different vocabulary examples, you know, quizzes, for example. This particular one was all for the Chinese context, but word wall, for example, is a great one to use. So there are lots and lots of different, I've stopped sharing again now, but there are lots and lots of different interactive ways of engaging learners. And again, things like YouTube videos. There is an app called Chatterpix, where you can make a cuddly toy talk, or you can take a photo of something and and then record a message, and it makes it look like the toy talk. So there are lots and lots of age-appropriate different things to do with young learners. And again, they can do, you know, they can do lots of things in terms of creating their own videos. They can add things to photos. You know, there's an awful lot you can do on the phone specifically in terms of adding text to a photo. You can, if you've not looked at it, there are lots of creative ways to use Jamboard, which is a Google thing. It's like an online whiteboard. And I've done things where I've arranged photos of different places, like a bakery, a supermarket, etc. And I've arranged them like a town. And then because it works live, you can essentially, you know, pretend that you're in there and you say, okay, you know, how do you direct it from there to there? And you can follow the route direct. So there are lots and lots of creative ways, but I think you're absolutely right. It has to be more interactive and interactive in different ways than it does with older learners.
This is very nice. So Chatterpix, Jamboards, we can make use of those platform for teaching young learners to try to engage them in our learning. Well, okay, dear participants, maybe I will open, you can use the reaction chat for if you have question for that to Sabine related to our material for today. So please, we still have 10 minutes. Yeah, not more than 10 minutes, Sabine, because we start earlier. Like you mentioned, we can edit earlier either. So please, participants, you have the question. Okay, Ibu Bita Rahmani. Yes, please, Ibu.
Right. Okay, thank you, moderator Ibu Yani. All right, this is very informative session. Thank you, Sabine. Okay, just quick question that comes in my mind based on your informative explanation related to the formative peer feedback that you mentioned about that. I was wondering how could it be run in this online learning? So yeah, maybe you can give me some insights related with that one. Thank you.
Of course. So peer feedback, it will very much depend on your context, how old your learners are, and what it is they're giving feedback on. So you can, for example, ask students to prepare a presentation, and then peers give feedback in the comments. And here in particular, in an environment such as Zoom, of course, they can also give feedback personally if they don't want the whole rest of the group to see via the chat, or they can give feedback directly to the tutor, who can then curate it and actually make sure that it isn't, that it's appropriate, for example. But you can also give feedback on a written piece of work through comments, comment features on different materials. You can have a student present. So for example, I asked all my students to present their language portrait in one session. But what I could have done is have one student present per session and then have a peer discussion afterwards. What I would say about peer feedback is to make sure that it is guided in some way, so that we make sure that we ask for peer feedback in a specific fashion. So we might say, rather than say, oh, what did you think? Say, okay, what can you say about the spoken language skills? Or what did you find informative? Phrase questions in such a way that there are positive outcomes. I think students can very often be very critical of each other when it comes to peer feedback, and we can guide that in our instructional design. You know, you will notice that when I asked you, what are you taking away from this session? What do you think, what did you find useful? I did not at this point, because I was trying to just do something very quickly, say, how could I have made this session better? Because I was trying to, because if I had asked that question, I would have wanted to spend lots of time engaging with your comments, and we didn't have time for that. So think about what questions you're asking in terms of peer feedback. But yeah, in terms of breakout rooms or using the chat function, you could even do a Google form. You could set up a Google form as a feedback form and ask students to fill it in. So there are lots and lots of different, in this way, actually, technology makes it easier to gather feedback. If you use a Jamboard on there are opportunities for like a post-it note. So students can leave a little post-it note with a comment on there. So that, yeah, there are lots and lots of different ways to encourage feedback, both spoken and written.
Okay, yeah, this is a very interesting. Well, so we still have one spot for one more questions, direct questions here. Maybe everyone, dear students, do you have any question for Sabine? If not, maybe I will read another one questions from the chat. So still opportunity for the audience to have a questions. No. Okay. Well, it is about the allocated time, Sabine. One of the participants asked about how should teacher manage the allocated time that provided by policymaker in EFL classroom. We usually have a limited time for language classroom. So how to manage it and manage the time so it can be useful for all of the learners.
I think, again, that is a very important question, and it depends how your system works. So I will speak to the UK because that is the context that I know best. But here, 1 credit, if a module gets 1 credit, that is the equivalent to 10 hours of learning. So if a university module has 20 credits, that means that the student is meant to spend 200 hours learning on that module, but maybe only 20 hours of that are in real time, face-to-face interaction. So students are expected to do a lot of learning in their own time. Most students don't know or understand this allocation, and they look at the face-to-face time and they think that is it. So I think we need to work with students to help them understand how we are expecting to engage them in the class and how we are expecting them to engage outside of class. And I said earlier to throw out this idea of this lesson takes place on a Tuesday afternoon from 2 till 4. And it's more, this module takes place from October to January. And this is what it's going to look like. And this is what we will do in class. And this is what we will do outside of class. And all of it is part of the learning journey. So it does come to thinking very carefully, what do you need to be in the same room as the students for? What do you need to see the students for? And what could they theoretically do themselves, and design around that critically? And it's very tricky to go into more detail without knowing very specific contexts, but it does come down to exploring the learning inside the classroom and outside the classroom, and maximizing the time that we have together with our students to make sure we don't spend that time, I don't know, asking students to read texts out loud or something, you know, the stuff that they could do elsewhere, essentially.
Yeah. So we can put it all in the instructional design, right? I mean, to the plan, all of the plan when it comes to the specific skills, and then what the activities, and then the assessment as well, and then all of them together in the instructional design, in detailed instructional design. Okay, we still have 5 minutes more. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, quick question, Ms. Ratih. One more questions, Sabine, from participants. Quick question, Ibu Ratih.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Sabine, I have a question. I do love your matrix. And in the university, that unfortunately then in university level that we do not, most of us teaching for a specific language skills. So how can I have a chance to adapt or adopt your matrix, which is suitable with only certain language skills? That's all my questions. Thank you.
Can you give me an example of what language skills? Do you mean like listening, speaking, reading, writing, or?
Okay, for examples, in this semester that we have a specific essay, specific writing, for example, essay writing, scientific writing, something like that. So my question is, in what area then we have a chance to adopt and adapt your matrix then?
I think it's still very applicable, because in a class or a module about essay writing, you don't spend all your time writing. You still talk, there is still interaction. So there are still opportunities. For example, if I think about essay writing specifically, you can think about the vocabulary. You know, you could ask students to go and research and think about the vocabulary that they need, and together curate a vocabulary list. So that would be one interactive element. You could ask students to write an introduction to an essay. You won't have time to discuss a full essay, but you would have time to ask students to write an introduction and compare that to what would you expect a good introduction to have, setting the scene, deciding on, you know, methods, methodology, whatever it is that you're trying to teach, and then base a discussion around that. That's where your peer feedback could come in. So there are still many opportunities. I would still look at the learning outcomes that you want the students to achieve, and then think about the different creative ways that they can go about achieving those outcomes. I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay, so instead of pay attention on dividing the language skill, then I have to focus on in each learning objective learning for in a certain meeting. That's what you mean? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
It's very nice. Yes. Yeah, I believe that all of us have a lot of questions that's related to the practical issues. Yes, online learning somehow gives us another problem that we have to solve related to the participants engagement, and then a lot of things about it. So one thing that, yeah, sorry, so we comes to the end of our session. Thank you very much for all of the explanation. Well, if I may wrap up of all of the material that we have learned from Sabine here, we have we have to focus on the pedagogy or technology that we will use. We have to think a lot what technology that we will use when we need to teach in our online classroom. Based on the participants' questions, we have a lot of ideas related to the how to engage participants that we have done, and then we practice directly with Sabine. We can use the chat plot to engage the participant to get the understanding what we have explained or what we have done, and then checking understanding, we can use the chat plot. There is one thing that's very interesting, Sabine. Maybe we try in my class. I will try in my class. And then for young learners, we have a Jamboard or Chatterpix. Maybe that we can try. Yes, we need to learn more about a lot of platform or any other tools in online to engage our participants. We also have it's very interesting. It's about the jelly salmon stages that we can put it in our classroom, put it into practice in our classroom, and also the clearer. Anyone still remember what is a clearer and then what is a jelly salmon? Maybe next will be in one of the questions after this. I think that's all. Yeah, I believe that a lot of things that we learn for us in the afternoon. Thank you very much, Sabine, for your great presentation and then information and learning point. There's a lot of learning point that we have.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that's all for our first session with Sabine, Dr. Sabine Little from the University of Sheffield. So the times right now, I give it back to you, Farah and Melania. Thank you for Sabine. Hopefully we can meet in person someday. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Ma'am Yani. I will be taking over from here. So we have finally come to the end of the session. And a very special thanks to our keynote speaker, Dr. Sabine Little, PhD. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and leading us to the journey on developing digitalized instructional materials. However, please don't leave just yet because my partner, Melanie, has some announcement to give regarding the short course regulation and how to participate on the giveaway. Please, Melanie, thank you.
All right, then now I would like to inform you of some important announcement for all participants who take part in the short course program for the next 4 days. Let me do a share screen. Okay, for the participants, I remind to fill out the attendance list. And it is informed that participants who can take part of short course activities up to the 5th day will be limited. So requirement to take the entire short course is for undergraduate students and for who have done re-registration and answer the question regarding today's seminar provided on the Google form, have participated in activities on the first day of the meeting, which is now. And participants who are selected to take part in the next short course will be notified via email. So please always check your email or in spam. Selected participant will be created in a new WhatsApp group, and we will give a new Zoom meeting account and new password, as well as access to the short course module through UHAMKA online learning. So, visiting lecturer short course UHAMKA 2020 have a special giveaway. And how to participate? First, follow at English_UHAMKA Instagram account. Write your comment of the visiting lecturer and short course event. It can be about what you learned, memorable moments, or anything that hit you. So post on Instagram story and use hashtag UHAMKA short course 2020 and tag at English_UHAMKA. The more creative, the greater the chance to win. You can use screenshot, video clip, illustration, and etc. No later than 15 July. And the winner will be contacted via Instagram by the committee. So don't forget for joining this special giveaway and make sure you follow our Instagram account. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Melanie, for the announcements. So for the remaining 4 days of the short course, we will be in touch with you via email. So make sure that you check your email regularly. And I would like to thank all the wonderful people that has joined the seminar today. Once again, on behalf of the committee, I would like to say thank you for your participation, and I hope that all of the knowledge that we gained today can bring a lot of benefit in the future. It's been an honor to be among such accomplished individuals, and I wish you a very good day. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
Thank you, everyone.
So hopefully all of the information have been informed very well. So if you have questions, so all of the participants, please recheck again the email. Okay.
Baby, take my hand, I want you to be my husband, 'cause you're my Iron Man, and I love you 3000. Baby, take a chance, 'cause I want this to be something straight out of a Hollywood movie. I see you standing there in your hot cutaway, and all I can think is where is the rain, 'cause I know you wanna ask, scared to my number pass, I can see it in your eyes. Just take me by surprise. And oh, my friend, they tell me I think you're planning to get on running. But I wanted to be out of the blue, so make sure I have no clues. So in your eyes, baby, take my hand. I want you to be my husband, 'cause you're my Iron Man, and I love you 3000. Baby, take a chance, 'cause I want this to be something straight out of a Hollywood movie. And we're having dinner, but baby, you're my midnight. I see the way you smile, and thinking about the eye you reach in your pocket. Emotional I can't, I'm for your good ask. I answered too fast, and oh, my friend, they tell me they think you're planning to get on funny. So now I can't stop thinking about you. I featured all of the clues. So when you ask, baby, take my hand. I want you to be my husband, 'cause you're my Iron Man, and I love you 3000. Baby, take a chance, 'cause I want this to be something straight out of a Hollywood movie, baby. No spoilers, please. Da-da-da-da-da-da. No spoilers, please. Baby, take my hand. I want you to be my husband, 'cause you're my Iron Man, and I love you 3000. Baby, take a chance, 'cause I want this to be something straight out of a Hollywood movie, baby. No spoilers, please. Da-da-da-da-da-da. No spoilers, please. Da-da-da-da-da-da. No spoilers, please. Da-da-da-da-da-da.